All right, so it's my turn.
Next up,
All right,
Trangus Tom.
Trangus time, which means we're going to talk about medical cannibalism.
Oh.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Doctors that eat people?
Hold on while I have a little slice of Joe.
Yeah. So, I already kind of did this one for you guys on a podcast that got messed up.
A lost episode.
Right. But I wanted to do it again because I already did all the writing and research for it. And I'll be goddamn. I'll be goddamn.
That's fair.
My story is going to start with something called bitumen, which is it's like what they call it like natural asphalt, right? And so like the Dead Sea, there's chunks of this black asphalty stuff floating around in there. And specifically in like Arab and a lot of Eastern medicine, they had this bitumen that they would collect from the Dead Sea, and they called it Mumia. And not like Mamma Mia.
Yeah, it was. I couldn't.
Mumia. M-U-M-I-A.
I can't not hear Mamma Mia.
Yeah. Well, the word is derived from a Persian expression.
From Italy.
Yeah, it's actually Mario.
Broadway play.
It's a me, a Mamma Mia. It's a Mamma Mia. Very offensive what we've done.
I would like to apologize.
Yeah, I'm gonna get ahead of this. I'm not like them. So no, there's a Persian expression for wax that's just mum.
Wax.
Yeah, wax. And they applied the Mumia to natural asphalts from southern Iran, where like the Dead Sea is, like, imagine. I think so.
I believe so.
So it has a long tradition in Arab medicine specifically, because they mentioned it in something called the Papyrus Ebers, the oldest and most comprehensive Egyptian medical treatise from the 1500s. It was effective in treating intestinal parasites, alopecia, and gynecological disorders.
So, but when you say asphalt, like, is that like a dirt, like a
I
dirty
think
something?
No, it's like I think it's like sticky and kind of like oily almost, and it's like I think it must just be like very carbon, like a lot of carbon. So it would be like, and this is just me taking a random stab. Clearly, I haven't done enough research for this, but I would imagine that it works kind of similarly to like if you were to ingest like activated charcoal.
That's what it sounded like.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. So yeah, for intestinal parasites, alopecia, and gynecological disorders.
Sweet.
Which treating
Put it on your
gynecological
puss, put it on your
disorders
noggin.
in the 1500s had to have been a fucking nightmare.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
I
just-
can only imagine.
They're like, well, have you heard of asphalt?
Tell me all the things you've tried shoving up there.
Yeah, because I got one.
Try this.
The medical use is also documented by Avicenna, the most famous and influential scientist of the Islamic Golden Age, in his book, The Canon of Medicine, used by European universities until 1650.
Wow.
So these European universities were getting this medical information that was shared, and they were seeing all of this, but some of it they were taking out of context, right? Because they weren't exactly sure what all this stuff was. Every once in a while, there'd be something that just kind of slipped through the cracks, and they didn't quite get it. Specifically, this Mumia, they started to assume that it had something to do with mummies specifically, like mummified people.
Mumia.
That's right. Mummies. Mummies.
Mamma Mummy.
Yeah, so
Just a real bad case of misreading.
yeah. What's crazy is how it just never got connected. And like they also just like thought there was some kind of spiritual magical thing about like mummies, like because
Like they had eternal life or something.
yeah, so they were like, oh, if you eat this person or a bit of this person with that must be why they use it, because there's something magic.
I can see that logic.
Yeah. And so it
Dr.
just
Logic magic.
Science.
Science of its time. Of the day.
yeah. By the 12th century, Muslim writers started documenting
Oh, okay.
the use of mummies in medicine. from that time, Mumia was also used for ground Egyptian mummies, presumably due to its intense black color. Like, so when you ground up the mummies, they'd be like basically just decomposed, so it would be kind of like black, kind of like the natural asphalt. And so people were like, yeah,
This is same.
yeah, it fits the description, right?
Looks right. Looks
So then it became a popular drug in Europe because it fell in with all these other drugs, and no one thought twice about it, except for the fact that it was ground up long dead people. And so that's one of the reasons why there aren't as many mummies. Like, the Egyptians mummified like so many people, and there's not very many of them left. And a big part of it is because there was a huge trade for that through Europe, and Europeans ate most of the mummies.
Oopsie.
Oh.
Yes.
We ate all the mummies. I'm afraid we ate all of them.
Mightn't I some mummy?
I don't know when they made that trade if that's what they knew was going to happen to them. Like, yeah, I guess you can have these mummies. And they're like, what are you doing with them?
Okay, so that's where it gets crazy. Because first of all, it was like there were certain groups that were really getting into like the mummy trade. Specifically, people who were like
People who are giving mummy money.
they like that mummy money.
Mummy money.
Yeah. But
Mamma mia, mummy money.
Mamma mia, mamma mia.
Mama made me some mummy money.
Wait a minute. The people selling the bodies, a lot of times after like the initial, they weren't getting actual mummies. Like, it was pretty hard to get your hands on an actual mummy. So
Because you need like a Tomb Raider.
yeah, basically, Laura Croft. Yes. She's actually coming up next. Laura Croft, the main Mumia exporter. But no, it's insane because what they would start doing is just selling dead bodies that weren't mummies and had just been like found in the desert, or worse, left in the desert. And what's really crazy is a lot of times this was like the bodies of slaves that the Europeans had brought over from the New World. And the reason why they were able to bring them over under the law was they had to call, like, if they were cannibals, they were not seen as people. So all these early explorers were getting away with just calling all these people cannibals so they could ship them back because they weren't finding any gold.
Hey, cut this guy eating a finger. You mind if I bring him in?
Yeah.
Seems like a cannibal to me.
Yeah, I see he's missing a finger. That's unrelated. But that's the thing, is that's who they would bring over, and then they would die, and then their bodies would be used for this medical cannibalism. So the very fact that the Europeans called them cannibals in the first place wound up being so that they, the irony is that the Europeans wound up being the ones eating them. Because their bodies were being taken and prepared and left in the desert, stuffed with like asphalt or whatever to seem like they were mummies. And this practice was like very widespread all through like the Middle Ages in Europe. There's a bunch of different recipes for mumia because eventually it stopped becoming reasonable for them to get real mummies, so they would prepare animals by drying them out and desiccating them and kind of like mummifying animals and then using that. And
Some farmhand in the Middle Ages Europe is like writing a 3-paragraph essay about how they personally were affected by this and putting it on their little medieval cooking blog. Some of my fondest memories are chasing my slave around the property, and then he died, and now I'm eating him.
Right.
Mum.
Man, oh man.
And the worst part was a lot of the people who were sourcing these dead bodies, like, that's what was crazy, is like when the Black Death was happening, they didn't give a shit. They were selling those bodies.
Oh, profit always, bro.
Yeah, yeah.
We've always been the same.
Yeah, so,
Money over mummies.
and then it like kind of took on a life of its own after a while because
Ooh, spooky.
not that it was haunted. I just mean that at first it's this misunderstanding, but then it becomes common thought and no one questions
It
it.
sounds like that's happened layers and layers and layers of times there.
Yes. So then mummy, or wild men flesh, they called it different things.
Wild men flesh.
I know, right? That's a
Whoa,
weird
Break
one.
me off
Right.
for that.
That's not even appealing.
No,
It's kind of on the nose there.
yeah. You kind of let it lets the game away. It's like, wait, you guys knew this?
Yeah.
You couldn't call it jerky or something.
It's like if you called on the phone and be like, hey man, you gotta use code whenever you call.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Go to a payphone. Call it back.
Yeah.
There's history of it being sold in upper Bavarian pharmacies as late as the 19th century as a remedy for
Wow.
tuberculosis, which definitely wasn't true, but
Yeah.
they're using it.
You gotta try stuff.
In 1924, the pharmaceutical company E. Merck, which is still around, they still sold Mumia, and they called it Mumia vera aegyptica, and they sold it for 24 gold marks per kilogram. And in fact, if you look up on their website, one of their employees, I can't remember when it was, but they were looking through some old stuff, and they found pieces of a mummy, like just in an old storage cabinet,
Yikes.
because that's what they were using to make the Mumia.
Damn.
So that's how crazy it is. And even as late as like 1973, there
Too
were
late.
too
recent.
super
Too
late.
Too fresh.
We're in the 12th century a minute ago.
Yeah. No, that's what's so
Colonel-
crazy. Is it literally like 1,000 years of eating people? 1,000 years, and we treat cannibalism like it's like this, like it like never had whatever, and you always think of it as being like like uncontacted tribes or something like that. But it's like no, Europeans are like the most prolific cannibals ever. And anyways, yeah, so up through like the 70s, if you went to like witch shops or like weird like occult places, you could still buy it. And I did find one weirdo on the internet who I think is a part of a cult, and I am still planning on investigating him and getting down to the bottom of it. But he sells it, but it's like, there's no actual people in this. It's this weird special blend of oils or whatever the hell.
No.
You're like, well, we're done here. If this is, I want the real thing.
Yeah, point me in the direction of the people seller.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see if there's any
So
more notes.
does
I
that
want to make here.
like natural material from did you say the Black Sea still does that still exist, or they like over harvest that?
Yeah, I think it's much harder to find now
Yeah.
than it was. But I also don't think it really had much like medical use. I mean, way back when, it's like what was people's ideas of health? You know what I mean? Like to a certain degree, if you just pick up dirt and eat it, that might be healthier than the way you've been living your life. You know what I mean? And
I mean,
so,
look at all these fucking energy drinks.
Who are we? To make money?
Right.
who are we? We're cannibalizing the energy.
Oh.
Yeah, up to the 20th century, the trade in Europe reached its peak in the 16th to the 18th centuries. So 1700s was like still the peak of this.
Rolling at it.
Yeah, it was also popular in Japan and China, where it received panacea status as a drug.
What's that mean?
Like a pharmacy store.
Like a cure-all.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, and Mumia was also used in the Holy Land for like travelers in the late 19th century as an expensive medicine against nervous conditions, sudden anxiety, and the evil eye, which was a very real thing back then. They thought someone could look at you and you'd get the evil eye, and then you'd get sick and die.
Gotta get that man some mummy.
Yeah, get some mummy in him. Feed him mummy. Put long dead person in his mouth to save him.
Yeah.
Eat a little bit of this.
Right.
Just creeping me out, making me eat some mummy. Wow.
But
Yeah.
also, they said like they use it for drugs too. Like I wonder if they could eat it like it was like mushrooms or something, or did they like snort it or smoke it?
Oh, they probably snorted that shit back in then.
Yeah.
You're
I-
grinding it down.
Probably blew it up each other's assholes
Right.
too.
Yeah. I'm assuming.
Probably.
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 Probably pretty they bet.
Bro.
I'm assuming they ingested it, but like who knows?
Who
There's
knows,
no
yeah.
way it's not going to get you high or anything. It's just probably going to make you super
It's
sick.
probably not gonna do much for you. It doesn't sound like.
No.
No.
It's a very stupid thing to do, and we shouldn't have done it, but we did it for 1,000 years.
That's crazy.
Here's a question
But
for my fellow blunt people.
Mhm.
Would you like to be rolled up and smoked when you're dead?
Yup.
Mm.
Like how high?
Mm-hmm.
Like if I can pop back up? Like every time someone smokes me.
I grant wishes.
Like, I know what's going on. You got a question, I got all the answers. I'm dead.
Yeah. That's immediately jumped to resurrection. Because it's their 33rd birthday.
Yeah.
Oh, that's how I come back.
Yeah.
I keep coming back.
And on the
Every
third
time.
day, they smoked a blunt.